Welcome back to Menopause Reimagined, the podcast where modern science meets timeless wisdom. A place where we explore menopause not simply as a hormonal event, but as a profound transition in a woman's health, identity, and life journey. I am Swati Madan, registered nutritionist, functional medicine practitioner, and founder of Nutrilogy. For over a decade, I've worked with women navigating hormonal health, metabolism, longevity, and midlife transitions. And one thing I've learned is this: women are rarely looking only for symptom relief. They're looking for understanding. They're asking, what is happening to my body? But more often, they're also asking, why does this feel bigger than my hormones? And perhaps that question sits at the heart of today's episode. Because today we are exploring two very different but equally important ways of understanding menopause: the language of science and the language of wisdom. For most of modern history, menopause has largely been discussed through a medical lens. Hormones decline, symptoms appear, treatments are considered, and that conversation matters enormously. Because for far too long, women have not been taken seriously. Women have been told, it's just stress, it's part of aging, you'll just have to get on with it. Fortunately, that is changing. We now know more about menopause than ever before. And that knowledge is empowering. But I sometimes wonder whether something was lost along the way. Because when I sit with women in clinic, they often describe something that feels bigger than biology alone. If I had to choose one sentence that captures the experience of so many women, it would probably be this: I don't feel like myself anymore. Not I have hot flushes, not I have gained weight, not I am not sleeping. Although those things may absolutely be true, but rather, I don't recognize myself. Perhaps you have felt that yourself, or perhaps you've heard someone you love say it. There's often a grief hidden within that sentence, a feeling of losing familiarity, losing predictability, losing confidence in a body that once felt reliable, and that can feel frightening. This is where science becomes incredibly important. Because science brings clarity. Science replaces confusion with understanding. We know now that estrogen receptors exist throughout the body, not just within the reproductive system. They're found in the brain, the cardiovascular system, the muscles, the bones, the skin, the gut, and the nervous system. Which means menopause is not simply a reproductive transition. It's a whole body transition. Suddenly, the woman experiencing brain fog, poor sleep, joint aches, palpitations, anxiety, changes in body composition, or difficulty recovering from stress is not imagining things. Her physiology is changing. Science helps us understand why strength training becomes increasingly important, why protein requirements may change, why insulin sensitivity can shift, why sleep becomes one of the most powerful health interventions available, why recovery matters more than it did 20 years ago. Science gives us mechanisms, and mechanisms allow us to make decisions. Decisions around nutrition, movement, medical support, hormone therapy, sleep, stress management, and long-term health. Science gives us tools, and women deserve access to these tools. I remember working with a woman in her late 40s. Successful career, teenage children, a demanding job, aging parents. And like many women, she was carrying the emotional, practical weight of several generations at once. She sat in front of me and said, I don't understand what has happened to me. I used to be able to do everything. I could function on little sleep. I could eat anything. I could push through stress. Now I feel like my body is fighting me. What struck me wasn't the symptoms, it was the shame. She genuinely believed she had become weak, that she lacked discipline, that she simply needed to try harder. And perhaps one of the most important things healthcare professionals can do for women in midlife is remove that shame. Because the body she had at 48 was not the body she had at 28 or 24. So that isn't failure, that's physiology. The conversation shifted from how do I get my old body back to how do I support the body I have now? And those are very different questions. Even after symptoms improve, another question often remains. Women still say, something else feels different. And perhaps that's because menopause often arrives alongside other transitions. Children may be leaving home. Parents may need care. Careers may be changing. Relationships may be evolving. Priorities may shift. The body is changing. But often life is changing too. Perhaps menopause sits at the intersection of biology and biography. This is where wisdom traditions become interesting. Not because they replace medicine, and not because they explain hormones, but because they ask different questions. Questions about meaning, questions about purpose, questions about how we live well through this change. Throughout history, many cultures view the later stages of a woman's life differently from the way modern Western societies often do. Not necessarily better, simply differently. In many indigenous communities, older women often became custodians of stories, traditions, and community memory. The social value did not diminish with age, their role evolved. In Japan, the idea of ikigai speaks to purpose and meaning across the lifespan. The belief that life continues to hold contribution, purpose, and growth regardless of age. In Ayurveda, life is viewed as moving through different seasons, with each season asking something different of us. Different nourishment, different rhythms, different priorities. Across Mediterranean cultures, aging often remains more integrated into family and community life. Older generations continue to contribute, mentor, and participate. Different cultures approach aging differently, but one idea appears repeatedly. Midlife is not an ending, it's a transition. Science asks what is happening. Wisdom asks, how do we live well through what is happening? Science asks, what is happening to the bones? Wisdom asks, what foundations are we building for the decades ahead? Science asks, how do we improve sleep? Wisdom asks, what rhythm does this body need now? Science asks, how do we support the nervous system? Wisdom asks, where are we spending our energy? Both matter. Neither replaces the other. One of the reasons I created Menopause Reimagined is because I felt women deserved a bigger conversation. Not less science, but just more context, more humanity, more space for complexity. As women, many of us spend decades being what everyone else needs us to be. The caregiver, the organizer, the reliable one, the one who remembers birthdays, books appointments, holds everything together. And then somewhere in midlife, many women find themselves asking, what do I need? Perhaps for the first time in years. And that isn't selfishness. That may simply be awareness. One woman once asked me, for the first time in my life, I have stopped apologizing for having boundaries. I remember thinking how powerful that was. Not because menopause created the boundary, perhaps because it created the clarity. The clarity to recognize, the clarity to what mattered, the clarity to what didn't matter, the clarity to what deserved energy, the clarity to what no longer deserves your energy. Not every woman experiences this, but enough women do that it deserves our attention. There's something important I want to acknowledge here. Human beings are wonderfully complex. Our hormones, nervous system, immune system, relationships, experiences, and environment are constantly interacting with one another. Modern science increasingly recognizes that our emotional lives, chronic stress, trauma history, sleep, social connection, and sense of safety can influence our physiology. They can have impact on our inflammation, stress responses, sleep quality, metabolic health, and perhaps even how intensely we experience these symptoms. At the same time, we need to be careful not to oversimplify that relationship. A hot flush is not simply unresolved trauma. Weight gain is not necessarily emotional burden. Joint pain is not automatically resistance to change. Women do not cause their symptoms by thinking incorrectly or feeling incorrectly. Menopause is a real biological transition with real physiological mechanisms. And yet, many women find that this stage of life also invites reflection. Questions about identity, questions about purpose, relationships, boundaries, questions about their priorities. Science helps us understand the mechanisms. Wisdom helps us explore the meaning. Perhaps both perspectives can sit together without needing to become the same thing. The philosophy behind this podcast is simple. Not science instead of wisdom, not wisdom instead of science. Science and wisdom, evidence and experience, biology and meaning. Because women are not simply hormone levels. They're not simply stories either. They are whole human beings, and whole human beings deserve whole conversations. Perhaps science and wisdom are not competing voices. Perhaps they're companions. Science helps us understand the body changing. Wisdom helps us understand ourselves changing. Science gives us knowledge. Wisdom gives us perspective. And perhaps women deserve both. Thank you for joining me for episode 2 of Menopause Reimagined. Next time, we'll explore a question that sits underneath almost every symptom women bring into the clinic. What is your body asking for now? Because beneath the frustration, beneath the confusion, and beneath the noise, the body is often communicating very clearly. The question is, are we listening? Until next time, take care of your body, honor your experience, and remember, this chapter is not simply about surviving. It's about understanding, adapting, and ultimately flourishing. Take care.